Yesterday, we continued our series here at Madison called Shaped to Serve. And the big idea from yesterday's message was to do for one person what you wished you could do for every person. In Acts 16, Paul had this big dream to go to Asia and to spread the gospel. And part of the reason why he wanted to do this, he was experiencing a lot of momentum through the hand and the power of God as they were going from church to church, strengthening those churches, and the number, the Bible says, of the groups of Christians was growing daily. And so I think Paul was just trying to build off the momentum of what he's already been experiencing. And so he thought big. Well, what we're experiencing here is something we can experience there. So let's go to Asia, this big place, and then we'll even reach more people. And even though his desire was godly, and even though his desire was good, the problem was this: it wasn't God's timing. And so God ended up sending him somewhere else, to this place called Philippi. And what's interesting is he shows up on scene and they can't even find 10 godly men to open up a synagogue where they usually would worship. So they end up going to this riverside where they see a group of women there praying. And I shared with you yesterday, if I'm Paul, I probably don't have the same attitude that he would have. I would show up there and I'm like, wait, this is not what I was expecting. You know, we were having big plans to go to Asia and to do things big, and now we're here and there's not even enough righteous people to make a synagogue. Lord, why would you send me here? But what I love about Paul and I love about his team is that what you see is not an attitude that got in the way of their perspective, but they knew that God's hand was in it. And so they stepped into that opportunity. And so they start having this conversation, and one of the people that overhears this conversation about the gospel is a lady named Lydia. And I told you yesterday, this is a lesson in of itself, isn't it? That people are always listening. When you're at the grocery store, when you're at work, the way you act, the way you respond, the way you choose to be is either going to draw good attention to Christ or it's not. And so knowing that people were always listening, we have to keep in mind that we're always drawing either good attention or bad attention to Jesus Christ. And so in the middle of this conversation, Lydia overhears, and the Bible makes a point to say that she was a seller of purple clothing and she was a worshiper of God. And being that she sold purple meant that she was wealthy. But also being a worshiper of God meant that she understood God and believed in God, but she just needed some direction. So if you look at her life, she was very, probably at that time, a very noble person. She was somebody that a lot of people looked at and was a person of influence, and she definitely had wealth. But what's interesting is while she had all maybe the wealth in the world that she could want, what she really needed at the end of the day was the message of God. And isn't it interesting that she didn't need money, but she needed a message? Paul had that message. And so he ends up having this conversation with Lydia, and Lydia and all of her household, the Bible says, ends up putting on Christ in baptism. And what's interesting, if you look at what most scholars say about Lydia, is that Lydia ended up becoming one of the people that started one of the first house churches in that entire region. Now remember back to the very beginning when Paul was told by God that he couldn't go to Asia? But even though he didn't get to do what he wanted to do, he still decided to go forward with what God had called him to, and ended up blessing an entire continent. Sometimes we don't fully know the impact of what we can do by those interactions that we might have with one person. And as you saw as in the message yesterday, as we talked about the illustration right behind me with the different roles that different people played in this little girl becoming a Christian one day, is that all these different people poured in so much energy and attention into one person. And you never know how that can end up blessing someone else down the road. And so I wanted to encourage you yesterday to do for one person what you wished you could do for everyone. And that was the action step. That maybe right now you have a heart for something. And you can't fix everything, but oftentimes what happens is because we can't do everything, sometimes we do nothing. But I want to encourage you that even though you can't do everything, you can do something. And you might not change the entire world, but you can change that person's world. And sometimes that can make all the difference. Do for one person what you wished you could do for every person. I hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you on Wednesday.